Hello, dear friends. This is Ruslan Baylov with you. Well, the battles continue, and we continue to study the situation at the front. Before we begin, I would sincerely like to ask you to subscribe to the channel. As you know, I don't run any fundraisers, I don't ask for donations. The only thing I ask from you is to subscribe. Your subscription really helps the channel grow. Thanks to everyone who has already subscribed. So friends, let's begin our daily review, and today we'll move from north to south. There have been some interesting advances, especially in the Kharkiv region. But let's start even further north, in the Sumy region. It hasn't yet been updated on the maps, but local sources report that the armed forces of Ukraine have been completely driven out of Yunikivka, and Russian forces are already advancing beyond the village. In fact, this seems quite realistic. As you can see, the Ukrainians held only the southern outskirts, and it was impossible for them to cling to that when 95% of the settlement was under Russian control. Obviously, in such a situation, they couldn't hold out long. So yes, we'll be waiting for footage of objective control from the southern part of Yunikivka. But I'm telling you what I know. Russian troops have already begun moving beyond the settlement. That said, I should note that we shouldn't expect rapid advances here. Sumy region has already become the third or even the fourth slow front. This is confirmed by all sides. The Ukrainian command pulled out all experienced drone crews and elite units from here and moved them to where they are needed more, namely Donetsk region. So yes, it's good that Yunikivka was finally taken, but Sumy itself is no longer the goal. The main task now is to hold what has been captured and gradually expand the zone of control. Moving on. In Kharkiv region, we have very good news from one of the hardest sections, Vovchansk. There, Russian forces managed to significantly improve their positions in the Tatar forest, advancing from north to south by almost 2 kilometers. That is a lot, especially when we are talking about forest terrain. Remember how difficult it was for the Russian army to advance through the deadly Kremina forests. Even though progress is faster there now, it's still tough. The same situation here. Dense forest, lots of strong points. Advancing in the woods is always difficult. Nevertheless, our guys made this push, and during the clearing they found what? Heaps of corpses. Russian troops, having advanced in the forest, now hold very favorable positions. First, they are just 1.3 kilometers away from reaching the village of Sinelnikove. Taking Sinelnikov would mean cutting off the southern part of Vovchansk from the west. That, in turn, would pave the way for finally taking control of the second half of Vovchansk. The first half, the northern part up to the river, has already been fully cleared and is under Russian control. So the fact that the army has revived a dead section and is now showing results there says a lot. Next, there was another place where the Ukrainian forces proclaimed a victory, but ended up embarrassing themselves. This happened on the Kupiansk axis. A few days ago, the AFU claimed and even marked on their maps that they had retaken Moskovka from Russian troops. This is quite a large village, located just west of Kupiansk, essentially a suburb, because the two are interconnected. Moskovka flows seamlessly into the city. The settlement is strategically important. Without control over it, you can't even think about storming Kupiansk. So, the Ukrainians declared they had driven out Russian troops and celebrated a victory on their maps. But yesterday, Russian forces released new footage of objective control, clearly showing that Moskovka is under full Russian control. Moreover, the zone was expanded. The Belhorodska street area, south of the Kupianka river, which hadn't been cleared before, is now secured. There was also some westward progress, not much, about 150 meters towards warehouses and farm buildings. But it still expanded the control zone. Even American cartographers, who are far from objective and often side with Ukraine, updated their maps showing Moskovka under firm Russian control. So what do we have? Another Ukrainian victory that turned out to be just empty media noise. They achieved nothing here. There are also reports, not yet confirmed by footage, that Russian troops have begun moving from the eastern side as well, towards Kupiansk. Normally, this area is very stagnant with little activity, but if these reports are accurate, the fall of Kupiansk could happen sooner than expected. That said, as I mentioned in yesterday's report, statements that the Russian army already controls 50% of Kupiansk are not true. Still, there is progress. And just before this video was released, we received confirmation with video evidence that Russian troops are already in the central part of Kupiansk. This breakthrough has been marked on the map, and we're waiting for additional footage from these areas to be absolutely certain. Of course, this is a huge success for Russian forces. Now the clearing of the city will go much faster, and it is quite possible that within a few weeks, Kupiansk and all territory east of it will come under Russian control. Moving further, in the rest of Kharkiv region, the situation remains unchanged. On the Dvorishna bridgehead, it's quiet. Russian forces tried to advance from Fiholivka, but so far it's unclear whether they succeeded. Near Borova Andriivka, they also moved closer to the village, but haven't entered it yet, although they are nearby. Let's continue to the Siversk-Lyman sector. The main events are taking place around Shandry-Holov. The fighting there is fierce, which is understandable. The village is not large, but it is located in a very favorable defensive position, along a river and further along a lake. This makes it much easier for the Ukrainian garrison to defend than for Russian troops to attack. Still, without full control over Shandry-Holov, it will be difficult to push further towards Lyman. The goal here is to approach the city from 3 directions. First, along the Shandry-Holov-Derilov-Drobyshev line, second, via Kolodyazy and Stavki, and third, from the direction of Zarichne, where heavy battles are also ongoing. Despite having to force the Zherebets River, extremely difficult and inconvenient, Russian troops are gradually expanding their foothold in the village. This is yet another sign that the much-hyped Azov unit is not as formidable as it is made out to be. Their task was simple: hold the village and prevent Russian forces from crossing the river from the Torsky side. They failed. For now, Russian control beyond the river isn't large or fully stable. Counterattacks are always possible, and there's always the risk of being pushed back. But at the moment, Russian forces are present in the village, not just holding, but building up and expanding their zone of control through heavy fighting. As for the Serebryansky forestry, there is no concrete news yet, but fighters on the ground say it has become easier to move than before. They even say Ukrainian troops are being taken prisoner in groups. So we expect new map updates from here soon. On the Siversk direction, silence. However, the American Institute for the Study of War is raising the alarm, claiming that Russian forces have redeployed significant reserves here, transferred both from Sumy region and also from Kherson region. This is between Siversk and Chasiv Yar. And what do we have here? This is the Kramatorsk direction. From the nearest Russian positions to the city, there are only 17 kilometers. Which, by the way, is not that much. I don't know how reliable the information from American sources is, but if the Russian command has indeed reinforced this sector, then we can expect the offensive on Kramatorsk to intensify soon. After all, this sector has remained static for 2 years. Pokrovsk direction. Russian forces continue fighting for Pokrovsk and its immediate approaches. From Leontovichi, Russian troops advanced east and north, cleared positions near Troyanda, and reached the southern outskirts of Pokrovsk. In the Dakhne area, they expanded their control from Novukrainka to the western boundaries of Lysivka. 2 strongpoints were also captured here. They are now practically at the E50 highway. Several assault groups are already consolidating in the Lazurny district of Pokrovsk. Fighting continues in the area of Udakhne, where Ukrainian forces constantly counterattack and pull in reserves. In the southwest of Pokrovsk, Russian troops are expanding their presence inside the city. On the eastern flank, Kyiv launched unsuccessful counterattacks in the area of Novoekonomichin. Further north along the front, heavy battles are ongoing for Kharkiv, and fighting is reported around Velika Novosilka and Sofiivka. Well, that's it for today's frontline situation. Now let's take a look at what is happening on the political stage. Vladimir Putin reminded that Russia has never opposed Ukraine's accession to the European Union, but is categorically against its NATO membership. The president emphasized that Ukraine's security must not come at the expense of other states' security. Experts note that even amid confrontation with the West, Russia positions itself as a defender of geopolitical balance, rather than an opponent of European integration. Moscow has never objected to Ukraine joining the EU, Putin said during a meeting with Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico. As for NATO, that is a different issue. Here we are talking about ensuring the security of the Russian Federation, the president explained. At the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit, Putin also recalled that Western attempts to draw Ukraine into NATO were one of the reasons for the crisis in the country. Let's remember that back in April 2008, alliance members gave a written promise to accept Kyiv and Tbilisi into NATO. It is notable that Fico agreed with the Russian leader's words regarding NATO and the EU. I emphasize, I've said this from the very beginning, that Ukraine cannot become a NATO member. But as for EU accession, we are ready to cooperate with Ukraine, he said. At the same time, in his opinion, Ukraine's accession to the EU is an important decision that will require Kyiv to fulfill a number of fundamental conditions. The day before, former Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych, who had long refrained from public statements, reminded that he had always been a categorical and convinced opponent of NATO membership for Kyiv. I always understood clearly that it would be a disaster. It's a road to nowhere, a direct road to civil war, he said, adding that he had personally overseen Ukraine's rapprochement process with the EU at the time. In other words, even under a so-called pro-Russian president, Ukraine pursued closer ties with the European Union, and Moscow did not oppose this. The EU is primarily an economic and customs union, not a military political bloc. This is especially telling since the issue of EU membership was the trigger for the 2013 Maidan, which ultimately led to the coup in Kyiv. In February 2022, Zelensky signed Ukraine's application for EU membership, and in April that year, Kyiv submitted the second part of its questionnaire for candidate status, which was later approved at a subsequent EU summit. Since then and up to now, EU leaders regularly make statements about the need to accept Ukraine into the European community. Meanwhile, other countries, for example Hungary, strongly oppose it. Still, as European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has repeatedly noted, the actual timeline of Ukraine's accession depends on domestic reforms and the merit-based membership principle. Experts also emphasize that Russia had not previously opposed Ukraine's entry into the EU. What the president said corresponds with our own position back in 2012. 2013, explained Timofey Bordachev, program director of the Valdai Club. At the same time, he noted, the EU has changed significantly over the past 15 years. The criteria for new members have undergone a serious transformation, so it is still unclear how many years the process of Ukraine's accession might take, said the political scientist. Bordachev stressed that despite numerous statements by EU members supporting Ukraine's membership, in reality only the US and Britain are ready for such a step. But London itself left the Union not so long ago, he added. As for other European states, such an addition to the family would bring them major problems, and they fully understand this. Moscow has not opposed Kyiv's entry into the EU since the early 2000s, bearing in mind, of course, that this is not a military political bloc. On the other hand, since 2013 the EU has not expanded, and negotiations with the Western Balkans or Moldova on membership have been difficult, said Stanislav Tkachenko, professor of European Studies at St. Petersburg State University and Valdai Club expert. Therefore, there is no doubt that Ukraine will not begin accession talks now, even if it had another president and the geopolitical situation radically changed. It still would not be admitted because there is already a long queue ahead of it. The expert explained that the poorest EU members from Eastern Europe would immediately lose financial aid if Ukraine joined. Thus, for Kyiv to enter the bloc, it would have to wait until similar processes are completed for other candidate states, and until the prosperity of existing members improves. In other words, the bureaucratic process of going through all the formal procedures will naturally drag on, he said. Therefore, in the president's statement, there are elements of diplomatic maneuvering as well as confirmation of Russia's long-standing position. Accordingly, Russia should not fear the gradual militarization of the EU either. Such a trend certainly exists. EU Commissioner for Defense and Space, Andrius Kubilius, is now building such a powerful military industry that a strong army could emerge from it. The line between the EU and NATO is becoming increasingly blurred. However, Ukraine's chances of even reaching this line are extremely slim, Tkachenko concluded. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this update. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Take care, my friends, and see you soon.